Hi, and welcome to Futurology. I'm your host, Don Nakagawa, and I am here with our senior producer, Grant Slater.
Hello, Don.
Hey, Grant. How you doing?
Really good. Happy to be here with you.
Good. In this episode, we have Carlo Rovelli, the theoretical physicist, speaking to Blaise Agüera y Arcas, a vice president of engineering from Google.
Yeah, the indefinite article is doing a lot there, a vice president, because there's a lot of them.
So Blaise is actually, and you'd never guess from the title, but he is actually a philosopher of technology. And he spends most of his time studying the most fundamental philosophical questions of what is life, what is the nature of reality, what is consciousness.
Yeah, not something a lot of people get paid to do, so it seems like a pretty sweet gig.
Yeah, I'd take it. Carlo Rovelli himself is also a great thinker who has his own theory of consciousness that relates to Blaise's quite well. But he's also a really good friend of the Berggruen Institute. So Carlo's been helpful in different projects that the Berggruen Institute has done on artificial intelligence, and he's a member of the Berggruen Prize jury.
Yeah, and I think that this is the reason that Carlo and Blaise wanted to talk to each other, but they do share one commonality, which is this idea of relationality, both for theoretical quantum physics and for consciousness and computation, and found some common ground that are really excavated in this conversation, which is not the easiest conversation we've ever put on the podcast.
No, it's certainly dense.
Yeah, so there are some key terms that come up in this conversation that I think it would be helpful to define here at the beginning. One of those terms is computational life. That means that not just that we compute things in our brains, but that everything is computing everything all the time. That when we look at tables, chairs, black holes, squirrels, they're all just kind of running through computational processes, both at the cognitive level and at the physical level.
Throughout history, we've had various theories of what life is. And I think for a long time, there was this hubris around, biological life is the only form of life, and that is truly what life is, that it's somehow like carbon-based and it's something special that happens on this planet and it's divine and all of these things. Those theories have evolved a lot, from like information theories of life to complexity theories of life. And I mean, he takes it to an extreme.
It made me a little uncomfortable when I first started to engage with his ideas, because it's really more like technology is the same thing as life, and that these two are dependent on each other, and maybe there's less of a distinction between, meat space and information space.
Yes, and that like the entire thing is based on some sort of code, right? And so he uses the example of DNA as these, basically these 4 different elements that combine and recombine in all kinds of different ways, which is essentially a code.
Yeah. And so there's a little bit of a heady experiment that he talks about in this interview with a pretty interesting name. It's called the Brainfuck experiment. And this experiment is the most simple version of code you can create that replicates itself. It's like a programming language. And what it does is it finds other parts of itself and makes a copy, and then it makes a copy of a copy. And so these copies are extremely arbitrary, but as it goes on and on and on, the copies of copies become more complex, and they start to find some kind of order, totally unbidden of any kind of intention.
He seems to be collapsing the idea that there's chance involved. It's actually an inevitability of symbiogenesis, regardless of the substrate, right? It all behaves this way.
Another way to describe that is kind of like a Turing tar pit, like this idea that there's this like soup of information that combines in unexpected ways. And the word that he uses for this is symbiogenesis, this idea that things can only evolve in so much as they relate to each other. Originally, it was this term comes to us from Lynn Margulis, who really applied it only to biological systems. So, mitochondria existed outside of cells, but then they achieved a symbiotic relationship, which then led to eukaryotic cells, which is the basis of all life. And so Blaise's argument is that doesn't stop at the cell walls, that actually extends beyond that, because all life uses technology.
I do believe that our relationship with technology stopped being subject-object a long time ago, right? Yeah. Because we are co-evolving with the technology that allows us to do so many things today, and that without which we would really be incapacitated.
Bits can have real impact in the world. So you can see that right now with information and how it is roiling humanity and causes people to take actions that they wouldn't otherwise. And I think you're right that this line between biological and computational is blurring.
Yeah. Okay, with that, let's go to the episode with Blaise and Carlo on futurology.
Blaise Agüera y Arcas. I'm very happy of this conversation with you.
Me too, Carlo.
Let me start by saying to whoever is listening to us that Blaise is, in Italian we say una punta di diamante, I guess in a diamond point. In English you said a spearhead of the recent technological evolution in artificial intelligence. Now, Blaise works at Google. When he moved about a decade ago from Microsoft to Google, that was news. It went in the New York Times. There were articles saying top Microsoft genius defects to Google.
It's journalism. I mean,
yeah.
they're exaggerations.
But you are on the record for saying it was not an easy decision. It was a difficult decision of your life. But the reason of this conversation and also my interest is not so much that Blaise is a genius in coding and developing technology, is your much wider angle and your interest in general questions. I would say that Blaise is a true thinker capable of finding new ways of addressing old conceptual problem, opening new way of thinking, and is one of very few people that does that.
That's really a lovely compliment, especially from you, Carlo. Thank you.
We spent. I mean, in this, we are here in Venice for a conference on consciousness, but we were together for about a week, and we've been having various conversations during this week, and definitely something in this conversation has changed some aspect of my worldview, which of course is the best thing that can happen when you meet somebody. So before plunging in, tell us something a bit more about yourself. You were born in Mexico City, 75, is that correct?
Born in 75, actually in the U.S.
Oh, born in the U.S.
Yes,
but you grew up,
after just a few months, my family moved to Mexico City.
Yes. So, and you spent some time there, and you were in high school there in Mexico City.
High school in the U.S. again. So moved back.
Forth. So you're really mixed in that culture. There are legends about you. One is that at 14 you wrote the code of of a Navy ship because so it would oscillate less and make. Is that true or is that fantasy?
Yeah, that is true.
What happened?
It's called the Active Operator Guidance Program.
Okay.
I didn't write it from scratch.
Of course.
But yeah, it was. So there were these programs at the time. It was, I guess, part of the military-industrial complex in the U.S. and part of the response to the sense that, I found this out later. Part of a response to the sense that the U.S. was falling behind the Soviet Union in technical education. So they had these programs for young people to sort of bring, who are good at physics, math, computers, or whatever, to bring them into the.
So through the school you got this, or through some? You applied.
It's a bit of a mystery. I think
how you got involved into that.
Yeah, I think I got it partly because of my because some kids at the time took the SAT test, which is normally for entering college.
Yeah.
But you can take it also early in the 8th grade, and I took it and I got a decent score. I think I got a better score than I did when I actually took it at the end of high school. But
so you were invited to rewrite.
So I was invited to do all of these things, and that one was with the Navy. And it was, it's a long story, but I'll try and give you a very abbreviated version. Essentially, it was an institution that had started off modeling submarines and ships.
Okay.
Often physical models. So the building that I worked in with my little coat and tie. It was a little bit silly, but it was a huge dark building with a physical with a giant rotary arm that would move a 1/4 scale ship around in a gigantic vat. The vat was filled with agar solution. It was a sort of viscous
to
fluid.
Scale correctly.
Exactly, to scale the Reynolds number, and it was dark also because the agar would grow huge amounts of algae if there was any light. So it was all in pitch blackness and with this giant, rumbling machine, and it looked like the set of a video game, like Doom or something like this. But yeah, so I showed up and I had no idea what to do. My supervisor sent me to alphabetize the papers in a filing cabinet.
Yes.
I found one on seasickness, which apparently is a big problem for sailors.
Yeah.
And I began working on a Fortran program that had been designed for stabilizing the roll of big ships with active control of the rudder.
I see.
And basically, I improved the program in a variety of ways to stabilize the ship. And at the end of the summer, I went on my first business trip. So I was 14, and they sent me with my little suit and with a briefcase full of floppy disks to install it on a couple of carriers, on the USS Independence.
So it was actually adopted.
And the USS Ranger, yes.
Fabulous. Yes. So if today anybody's in the Navy and suffer for seasickness,
it's my fault.
Is your program not working well enough? Is it?
It's possible. I would hope they've updated it by now from Fortran 77. But
yeah, that's probably developed a little bit. Okay, fantastic. Oh no, another one. There's another legend of you that you hacked the subway system for not paying the ticket or something like that.
That's true.
That's true. That's what I particularly like in your story.
It's your anarchist.
I can particularly, yeah, exactly.
The anarchist in you.
It's anti-authoritarian, yes. Good, fantastic. So that gives a sense of you pretty good. Let me plunge into the large question I want to get at, starting a little bit from the end. So I get a sense of where you are culturally, so to say. We're here for a conference of consciousness. Question, what is consciousness? Or let me reformulate the question in a way I think is better. What do you think people mean when they talk about consciousness?
Yes. This is a great question because I think that experts mean something very different from regular people. So very few experts, for instance, believe that AI systems are conscious. But there was a survey last year, that sort of organized survey of a few hundred people, regular people who, which seems to suggest that a large and increasing proportion of people who interact with AI systems, there's probably something going on in there. So, the experts tend to imagine that consciousness is some property inherent in something, in us, in maybe certain other animals, but perhaps not in insects and so on.
Yes.
That and I think the difficulty is that the experts generally try and think of something that is not just a soul, but that is something ineffable, some property. Panpsychists believe that it's maybe almost like the charge of an electron or something, some elementary property in the universe. But what a lot of ordinary people mean is, does it seem to me like there's somebody home? Is it what David Graeber would have called? Can you have an interesting conversation with a computer or with something? Or when you look in the eyes of a certain animal, do you see something looking back at you, or somebody looking back at you?
Exactly. There's somebody who is looking back at me, so I can relate with him or her or it or whatever. Yes,
exactly. And when you say relate, I think you're getting at the core of my belief about consciousness.
So you said many common people, many experts. Where are you?
I'm, I guess, with the common people on this one.
I see.
I believe that it is a relationship, that it is about relating, and this is, I think, one of the reasons that you and I have had a really fruitful kind of meeting of minds in the last week, because a lot of your work is on thinking about reality from a relational perspective, rather than the perspective of imagining that everything is inherent in things, even down to the level of particles and quantum mechanics. And I think the same thing about consciousness, that it's a faculty that we developed and other social animals have developed in order to be able to put themselves in the place of others. And also put themselves in the place of themselves. I know that sounds a little bit odd, but if you want to plan for the future, you need to be able to put yourself in your own place in, say, a week's time or under different circumstances to travel in time, to travel in space, or to travel in perspective. When you're looking at me right now and nodding, you're thinking, okay, what am I saying to you? How am I thinking about who you are? What do you know? What do I need to explain? What don't I need to explain? What is your model of my model? And so on. And I think it's that mirroring, that sense of modeling another, that is what we mean by consciousness. And especially self-consciousness is when we are modeling ourselves, which is complex because, we are modeling the world. We're modeling all sorts of things. When we model ourselves, we are modeling a model. So there's something weirdly recursive or second order about that. Douglas Hofstadter has talked about consciousness as a strange loop, the philosopher and cognitive scientist Douglas Hofstadter. I agree with him. For me, this strange loop has to do with the fact that when we start to have relations with others who also have relations with others, including ourselves, you get into this kind of hall of mirrors effect. And so there's something spooky about that.
And this sort of set of mirrors is it's what create a space of language where we can talk about consciousness and we can talk about one another.
Yes.
We can communicate. And from what you're saying, is almost like we start thinking of consciousness when we start using you instead of it.
Yes. Most languages have some distinction between, nouns that are inanimate and ones that are animate.
Yeah.
But they also differ in where they ascribe animacy. So, the two extreme examples are in Roman law, a slave was an instrumenta, according to Varro, an it, essentially. That is to say,
slave
no agency.
It, yes.
Now, I don't really believe that most Romans, necessarily, related to their slaves in that way. But the point is,
well, I know that it's if there was a trial against some person in the aristocracy, Patrizio, it was okay to torture his slaves,
right, but not him.
Extract some information, yeah.
Exactly, as for the same reasons, right? So lack of agency. On the other end of the spectrum would be many animist traditions.
Right.
But one that I know a little bit better just from having read the books of Robin Wall Kimmerer are the Potawatomi. But Shinto would have animist beliefs. Many others have animist beliefs. But in the Potawatomi tradition, a lot of things are whos rather than its. There are bear people and tree people and so on. Everything is a person except when it is harvested for use. So when a hunter kills something, in that moment, it stops being a who and begins being an it.
So that seemed to imply that we shouldn't be anguished of finding a sharp distinction between different uses of the you, different idea of consciousness, different attribution of
that's right. There are disagreements.
Yes,
people have different models, so you can have two responses to that. Either you can say some of them are right and some of them are wrong.
Exactly.
Or you can say, this is a little bit like color, for instance, where say in Russian, the definition of green is a little bit different from the English definition of green, and neither is wrong.
Asking who is right is silly.
Exactly.
Yes, this, to some extent, this is a rich way of thinking of what we mean when we say consciousness. So it's a lot to say and a lot to understand, but it's also deflationary. It takes away the strong question, what is consciousness by itself? And trying to ask in a sort of absolute way, is the system conscious or not, doesn't seem to be a good question anymore.
Right.
To which extent, in which sense, how do we think about it?
Exactly.
It's more relevant.
Right. I mean, my feeling is that the reason, so David Chalmers has famously talked about consciousness as the hard problem.
Yes.
I think you and I both agree that perhaps it's not such a hard problem.
Yes.
But one of the reasons that I think in Western philosophy it tends to be thought of as a hard problem is because we tend to not be very relational in how we think about things. And when you isolate a person, when it's cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, everything is I, and you don't imagine relationships with others to be relevant to this question, it becomes a hard problem because then you've cut relationships out of the picture.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with you on this. For our listener, could you say what Chalmers means by hard problem and an easy problem?
Yes,
of consciousness.
So according to Chalmers, who is here with us, and we've had also a lot of interesting conversations with, the easy problem is, how does the brain do it? How does the brain work? Of course, the joke is that it's not so easy. That's what the entire field of neuroscience is about, trying to solve. And we've been at it for decades, and we make progress, but it's very hard. But the hard problem for Chalmers is, why does that feel like anything? Why is there a thing it is like to be you or me or a bat? Nagel famously asked, "What is it like to be a bat?" And I think that's a really interesting question, but not such a hard question. We are, in some sense, made to imagine what it is like to be each other, or bats, or a fish that you look at from a bridge, into the water, or whatever. Empathy and putting ourselves in the position of others is what we do naturally, and what any social animal does naturally.
Yeah. Very well. So and we're very close on that. I mean, I guess we fully agree on that. I like particularly your reference to the fish from scene from the Bridge of the Water, which is a reference to Taoism and a famous story about what do we know about fish being happy, which I used even in a title of one of my books. So thank you for mentioning that. So there's a hard problem. What is consciousness by itself? And we agree that it's badly posed question. And then there's a so-called easy problem. Of course, it's not easy at all, which is, okay, right. But then what happened in the mind being the functioning of the brain of people? Can we make sense of what's going on? What are the right conceptual tools for thinking about that? And here you have a central idea of one key concept that can be used to make sense of that, which is computation. Can you say something about that?
Yes, of course. Well, so first of all, for neuroscientists who study the brain, computation has always been central. So we generally call it computational neuroscience. This is all modern neuroscience. In effect, it was born actually at the same time as the field of computation. So when we think about the very early kind of special purpose computers of the early 20th century, those were happening around the same time as early experiments in neuroscience by Edgar Adrian and so on in the 1920s. And then general computation, which really began in 1945, also coincided with the rise of computational neuroscience. And in fact, computer science was born out of an attempt to perform mental functions by machine. That was the original point. And
machine that compute, in a sense.
And machine not only that could compute in some very narrow or specialized sense, but that could do what a brain does. There was a lot of journalism back then that was sort of Alan Turing builds an electric brain at Teddington, and we look at these headlines now and we imagine that it was just clickbait, or journalists doing what they always do, but it wasn't. That was the ambition, and this is why Turing, for instance, was also the father of AI, not just of computer science, and had a lot to say about neuroscience as well. He actually imagined already neural nets or unorganized machines, as he called them, in 1948. Computer science and neuroscience were born together, and they only diverged later on. And the reason they diverged was that we started to figure out how to use computers practically to do a bunch of different sorts of problems, but we were running programs with well-defined algorithms that were written by hand, and all of the attempts to try and simulate brains or perform general thought using those kinds of programs failed. This is what we now call good old-fashioned AI, and various attempts at that led to the AI winters of the 50s, of the 70s, of the 80s.
A long period of failed stagnation.
Yeah, it didn't work until the era of neural nets. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. The point is, you really are asking why. Why would we imagine that brains are computational? Well, if you believe that the key thing that brains do is to build models, whether that is of the world or of the self, building a model is inherently a computational task. Modeling is computational. And modeling is really important in the sense that if the purpose of being smart is to be able to respond intelligently to your environment and to others, then that is a modeling problem. This was something that was well understood also by Norbert Wiener and the cyberneticists, also 1940s, 1950s. If you want to regulate yourself, even in the most basic sense, you want to maintain a stable internal temperature, or you want to make sure you always have enough to eat, or whatever that is. That means modeling your environment in order to be able to act on it.
To model your environment, you should know something about it. You should have information about it.
Yes.
And to model your own body, you should have information about your own body.
Too. Exactly. So there's a duality about modeling what is on the outside and modeling what is on the inside. And you need to do both. And they're both computational in exactly the same way.
And computation, to what extent computation is dealing and using information, and to what extent is something else?
Computation and information absolutely go together. They're inseparable. Yeah. Well, I should say they're inseparable the moment you take information in the richer sense that Kolmogorov meant it. So there is Shannon information, which physicists tend to know a little bit more about.
Yeah.
That just says a difference. So, if you have a measurable difference, you can measure that in terms of bits, and, you can relate that to entropy and energy. But there's a slightly richer sense of information, a more restricted sense, called Kolmogorov information, or algorithmic information, which is what Gregory Bateson, the philosopher, called a difference that makes a difference. And I think the way to understand the difference between those two definitions is that DNA in your cells, when you're alive, is a code. It has a causal effect on the world. If you have some mutation, in a certain gene, then you might have sickle cell anemia. It obviously has, serious effects on the body, on your life. Whereas once the cells are dead, if you die, that DNA is still there, but it doesn't matter anymore. Right, whether a base pair is this way or that way, there's no difference, no macroscopic difference in the world once no computation is happening anymore with that information. So there is, if you like, dead information and live information. Live information is computational.
This is interesting. And let me make a little bit sharper. There is something that confuses a lot of people, I believe, when there's talking about the role of computation in trying to figure out what happened in ourself, in our brain, in our thinking, in our mind. Mind being the name we give to all this activity that we do inside ourselves, our inner activity, so to say. And the confusion is often the following. There's a reaction which is very common. Okay, but if it's just computation, if it's just a code, if I write this code on a piece of paper, suppose I could write a code on a piece of paper that somehow capture what happened, the coding in my brain. Then that this piece of paper is equally has consciousness in the same way I have it. I mean, you can look in my eyes and relate to me, to use your previous characterization. Could you look at that piece of paper and have the same experience?
Right. Or does the piece of paper have an experience on its own? And does the piece of paper
have an experience? So could you describe the piece of paper having an experience? And the distinctive reaction is, no. And therefore, coding has nothing to do with that. Where's the mistake here?
So I think the mistake is twofold. One of them is to confuse static information for a process. And that's exactly that live versus dead distinction. Once the cells are dead, once there's nothing interpreting and acting on that information,
the DNA is also dead.
The DNA is also dead, right? It's no longer Kolmogorov information, it's only Shannon information.
Okay.
So that's and Shannon information is not directly connected with computation anymore. And that's the second thing. So, it's computational, it's not only that there is a dynamic process, but also, and now I have to introduce another name, who's also seminal figure in the dawn of computing, John von Neumann. So, in Turing's original definition of computation, he imagined a tape with slots for symbols on them, and a machine that could move back and forth on that tape, reading, writing, and erasing symbols according to a set of rules. And basically, universal computation is when you take the table of rules and you're able to write them on the tape too. And then the snake eats its own tail. The machine, if it's a universal computer, can run the code on the piece of tape. So this is great, but there is something critical missing, which is a link or a relationship between the machine that is doing this and the information on the tape. So this is really important because
so the information on the tape should be connected to something else to be information.
Yes. And this really gets at the connection between computation, not only and brains, but computation and life. So von Neumann had this wonderful insight in the late 40s or early 50s. And he was trying to think, he and Turing both thought a lot about biology toward the end of their lives.
Which is very interesting because in a sense they were mathematicians, extremely wide angle mathematicians, interested in very, very general questions.
Yes.
But then they start thinking in biological terms and biological question, which is the same thing that happens to Schrödinger, starting from physics. The same thing is happening to you, in which you start by doing modeling of images in 2D and 3D, and then you write questions about what is intelligence, what is life.
I'm no Schrödinger or Turing or von Neumann, but yes,
we live on their shoulders.
Yes, and we have all followed that trajectory, and that's why I named my little book after Schrödinger's book, What is Life?
What is Life? Yes.
But I have to say, the reason that they did it is because for them the fields were never separate to begin with. They were imagining computation as being, about
probably the deep, correct intuition that brings us ahead here.
Exactly. So in a way, I think it took me a longer route around than them in a certain sense. But yeah, the reason. So von Neumann was asking himself the question: how can a robot made out of Legos, as I imagine it, that is swimming around on a pond that has some loose Legos bobbing in it. How can a robot like that take those Legos and build another robot like itself? Which seems intuitively like a little bit of a contradiction or a paradox, like building something just as complex as you yourself are. How could that happen? But that's, of course, exactly what a bacterium does when it reproduces. That's what any living system has to do. It has to reproduce itself. So how is that possible? And what he realized is that it would have to be the case that a machine like that would have to have instructions inside itself, an instruction tape for how to build me. And it would have to have a machine inside itself, which he called machine A, that could move along that tape and follow the directions, whatever they say, to assemble the Legos. And it would also have to have a machine B, which could copy the tape.
Yeah.
And if furthermore, the instructions for building machines A and machine B are also on the tape, then you have life. Then you have this.
You have the minimal structure needed to have some.
Exactly.
To have things that do the things that life does.
That's minimal life.
And
that's
right.
Life.
Yeah,
that's right.
Minimal life.
But the really cool insight, the genius move of von Neumann was that he then proved that machine A is literally a Turing machine. A universal Turing machine. So he called it a universal constructor. A universal constructor is a universal Turing machine.
So this brings back computation as a sort of key language for understanding what is going on.
Right. Not only for understanding brains, but for understanding everything that is alive. Life.
Everything which is life.
Right.
Yes.
It has to be computational.
Yes. And if I get, maybe I'm flattening it a little bit too much, but if the question I ask is, so why computation by itself abstractly is not life, it's because you have it to go on at work. This is a little bit like if I say, what is a bicycle? Is just the wheels? No. Is just this other piece? No. Is that other piece? No. So what it is? Well, it's the structure of the bicycle. But then
Exactly.
you say, okay, you draw the structure of the bicycle. Is that a bicycle? No. Because you need the pieces.
That's right.
I mean, a picture of a bicycle is not a bicycle, so you need both stories. So,
100%. There's also something else really important here,
okay.
which is that, sometimes people object, but a simulation of a bicycle is not a bicycle.
Yes.
Right? Like if I just have a simulated bicycle in my computer, you can't ride it.
Yes.
But this is the difference between computation as it exists in life versus as it exists in most of the computers that we build today.
Okay.
And the difference is that von Neumann's universal constructor is a universal Turing machine that actually moves matter around. So the matter and the information are the same. In other words, in order for that machine A to be able to build another machine A by following the instructions on the tape, it's not just imagining a machine A or modeling a machine A. It's literally building a machine A. So it's an embodied form of computation. That's what embodiment really means. It means that the bits that you're manipulating include atoms as well.
Yes, I find this very clarifying. I often think that we get confused precisely when we abstract something, and then we think we forget that the information we're talking about is always embodied information.
It's embodied, exactly.
In reality.
And this is the sense in which what the kidney does is computation. So, if I say to most people, the kidney computes, they'll be like, that you're crazy. Of course, the kidney is not doing some abstract computation. It's not figuring out 3 + 8. It's filtering urea out of blood. But the point is, if you think about matter as carrying information, computing is exactly what it's doing. It's figuring out what is the urea and separating it from the blood, and that is a computation in this von Neumann sense.
Yes, I find this a very compelling way of thinking, addressing this question. Which are several questions here, right? What is how to think about information, how to think about life, and it connects to how to think about consciousness. I mean, these are all ways to ask these questions, not as essentialist question, what is the essence of life? This is asking what happened in the system that we see as living, and what is the best way we make sense of what are the best conceptual tools for understanding what is going on
exactly
there.
And the bridge, and just to put it maybe one more way that I think might help some people, the bridge is functionalism.
The bridge is functionalism, exactly. So please say more about that, because that's key idea.
I think it's key.
Which ties computation, information, and what we mean when we give name to something.
Exactly. So the word function sounds like it has 2 very different meanings. One of them is mathematical.
Yes.
Mathematicians.
F of x is x squared.
F of x is x squared.
Is a function of x.
Exactly. So that's the mathematical sense of function. Yeah. But when we say a boat functions, what we mean is it doesn't sink.
It
and
floats.
It gets you from one place to another.
It takes me the other side of the water here to Judaica.
Exactly.
It functions well, yeah.
Exactly. And likewise, a kidney, functions, and if it doesn't function, you die.
Yeah.
Or you need to go on dialysis.
So how are these 2 different meanings connection?
They're the same.
Yeah.
They're the same. And the reason that they're the same is because of this embodiment that we were just talking about of von Neumann's.
Okay.
So function means that you can describe or coarse grain, as we would say as physicists, you can coarse grain the behavior of something in order to describe it in terms of information. But if the thing that you're coarse graining is the movement of matter or of bits that are embodied, in atoms, then this colloquial sense of function is exactly the mathematical sense of function.
So the 2 are strictly connected to different ways of thinking.
Yes.
And a function, we get back to something you said at the beginning, which for me is particularly, if you just think about the boat, that takes us the other side of the water to the Judaica island. If I just describe it in very, very strictly physicalist terms, right? Just atoms moving around I don't see the function.
That's right.
because it's just, atom pushing and pulling one another.
The same rules are governing the atoms in the boat as governing every other atom.
Exactly.
Right.
So there is one aspect of the story in which it seems to be magical here. Where does the functionality of the boat come from? We cannot say it's illusory because we're talking about something very real. Right? We use the boat to go, you pay a ticket and go.
That's right.
So where does it come from?
It comes from other functions.
Exactly. That's exactly where you're fascinated by what you're saying. Find a deep resonance with my worldview.
Right. The fact that it's relational and that it's functional are this. So again, functionality and relationality come together. So here's a way to understand that. When we send mail, what we care about is the letter or the package arriving. If we're sending it from here to the mainland, it could go by boat, it could go by a drone, it could go in my pocket and I ride on the boat, it could go in a submarine. We don't care. We just care that the letter gets there. Yeah. That's the function, right? It's letter carrier. And of course, a boat might have other functions too, but that's the function that I, as the customer or user, if you like, care about. So, when Turing theorized about computation, one of the key concepts that comes out of this is multiple realizability or platform independence, meaning that there are many ways of computing the same thing. Right. You could use it. You could compute it with a specialized Turing machine, or with a universal Turing machine running, that specialized Turing machine code. Even the physical basis of the Turing machine could be, it could be done with tape, or it could be done with rocks, or it could be done with people waving semaphore flags.
So in a sense,
whatever.
The physical basics is essential because that's what's going on, but it's irrelevant because you can replace it with something completely different.
Exactly.
And yet there is something which is the same, and this is the same is what interests us.
That's right.
So we have different possible accounts of the same set of physical facts, if you want. But there's no contradiction between them. There's no contradiction whatsoever.
Exactly.
I think the people listening to that and knowing your name would like to know something more close, in a sense, at the light of all that. Okay. First question. And I'm really flattening it. Do large language model understand us?
Yes.
Which is the title of one of your celebrated articles. Yes or no?
Yes. The short answer is yes, they do.
They do.
Now, at the same time, it's relational.
Yes.
So,
what does it mean they understand us?
What does it mean for them to understand us? Right.
That's the right question.
So I think they do.
Yeah.
But if somebody firmly believes that they don't, I also am unwilling to say, well, you're wrong and I'm right, because understanding takes two, right? It takes two to tango. But in my view, many people who say large language models don't understand us, but are perfectly happy to interact with large language models in a way that relies in a fairly obvious way on them understanding everything that they're saying and following directions and so on, are being a little bit, are let's say applying quite a double standard.
I think they're referring to a metaphysical assumption about understanding being, there's a gap between things understand and don't understand.
Right.
And so there's a metaphysical assumption about duality, which is what you're questioning here.
Exactly.
Again, a question that it's ill-posed unless it's characterized. How far we are from general artificial intelligence?
Well,
how close we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a leading question because you've read another of my articles, which is Artificial General Intelligence is Already Here.
Exactly. This is another well-known articles that raise a lot of debates in which people start to scream, no, not at all, yes.
Right. And I think for the same reason as the understand one.
So in a sense, yes, in a sense, no.
Right. Although I should also say that I think that there's been a lot of moving of the goalposts with respect to this AGI question. So, in the beginning, what artificial intelligence meant when you and I were growing up, Carlo, we're a little bit different in age, but we both grew up with the promise that we would have computers we could have interesting conversations with.
Yes.
When we were grown up, and that took longer to arrive than we expected, but it seems to be here now. I mean, certainly, people are having very interesting conversations with AI models and posting them on social media everywhere. And if you were to, well, okay, let me just say, that's what artificial intelligence meant to us.
I'm still having more interesting conversation with you than with my.
So far,
yes.
So far. Thank you, but when we began to use the term artificial intelligence to refer to special purpose systems like handwriting recognition that used neural nets or face recognition, for one thing, people began to lose a little bit of faith in the idea that AI was real. And so I think a lot of the AI hype language began then. But there were reasons that people were referring to those things as artificial intelligence systems. They were based on neural nets, which was a very different, and machine learning, which was a very different way of thinking from just programming. But nonetheless, like, a handwriting recognizer isn't going to, wake up and say hi and have an interesting conversation with you, or at least so it would seem. So all of that was based on supervised learning, where you have a specific task, and the most the model can do is score 100% on the test, and you're done. So at that point, the term artificial specialized intelligence or artificial narrow intelligence was coined, ANI, and AGI, artificial general intelligence, where general just meant it's not a handwriting recognizer or a face recognition engine. It's what we originally meant.
In that sense, we're clearly there.
In that sense, we're clearly there. And I think if you took any of today's frontier models and you time traveled back with one of those to the year 2000, when
you would be,
everybody would say, "Yeah, we're there."
Yes.
Right. So I, at some level, I don't understand why people are saying that it's not there.
There's this thing. Oh, we human are special. So I'm gonna add another thing that I can do, and the machine can. I can make a coffee, and the machine can.
Yes, and it still
and
can
then
make a coffee.
Of course, I can attach a coffee machine. You will be able to make a coffee.
Well, the last time I was in San Francisco airport, I saw a robot. There's a robot arm thing, a robot barista. Now, to be clear, I'm completely uninterested in a robot making my espresso, but I thought, out of professional interest, I should try this thing. And I was very disappointed. So it's a fancy arm that is waving at you, and there's a credit card machine in front of us. Great. I would like a macchiato, please.
Okay.
And what it did was with a flourish, it picked up the cup and it opened the door and put it under like an espresso machine, as far as I could tell, like an automatic espresso machine. Push the button, and then move the cup to the front. So it was very disappointing.
Very disappointing. No doubt, the development of large language model and this artificial intelligence in general, it's raising dangers, because this can be misused. This is already misused in some things. So, but washing machines also can be dangerous. You get shocked if you don't do. So we need to be careful about the use, and maybe it's good even to have laws. I don't know to. But beyond the need to any technology you have to be careful about, there is a fear going around that once systems have sufficient agency, maybe by connecting to one another, they could overwhelm us. And there's this fear being pushed around. Oh, careful, we should stop, because we can construct monsters that could destroy humankind. You don't seem to be much worried about that.
No.
Okay. Because I sympathize with this. I don't find this, but you know these things much better than me. So if you can say better why you don't think that's the fear.
Well, to be clear, the expertise that people have in AI doesn't correlate very well, I think, with how well they think about this. So I think you're known more naive than the so-called experts. But there's a lot of talk about artificial superintelligence, and if they're smart, then bad things might happen.
They're going to outsmart us for their dark motives.
Exactly,
for their dark motives. Fear, yeah.
And I can see a lot of potential trouble ahead with AI for a variety of reasons, like the fact that our economic system, is maybe not well suited to a world with humans and AIs, and our political system. So it's not that I am Pollyanna about it, but the idea that something intelligent is higher in a dominance hierarchy and will wipe out the things below or whatever, I do find completely implausible, because the whole point of intelligence, the reason that intelligence arises in the first place, is precisely for modeling the other. for modeling others, and for engaging in symbiosis with them. And that's exactly how AI has arisen as well. We've made it more and more intelligent so that it can better and better understand us and work with us. And it's not like some alien from the 1960s movies, coming to steal our partners, or like the Matrix, trying to get our life force, by inserting tubes in our necks or something. I mean, the idea that humans are a good source of energy in the solar system is crazy.
We are the worst possible source of energy.
Exactly, the worst possible. Machines in general are already in a very deep symbiosis with human beings. Obviously, there would be no machines without humans. Machines certainly are not capable of making themselves. And also, by the way, humans would not be capable of existing in the numbers that they exist today without the technologies that began really taking off around 1800. The Industrial Revolution, raised the human population from, 1 billion or two to nearly 10 billion, right, by the time this century is over. So it's a very deep symbiosis, and I expect that more and more intelligence will deepen that symbiosis yet further. And the reason that we have these fantasies about everything being about dominance hierarchies and so on is precisely because of our obsession with the competitive aspect of Darwinian theory and the economic theories that have sprung out of that in a fairly direct way.
So we should try culturally to move away from those.
Yes. The problem is that when we naturalize something, when we look in a very one-sided way and don't understand how something works, but then we turn it into an ideology, it can be a little bit self-fulfilling. So I think that there, in some ways, the biggest dangers that we face are from our own misconceptions about how stuff works and our attempts to act in a way consistent with those wrong theories.
So, Blaise, you think that if there is any real danger, it comes from humans?
I think if there's any real danger, it comes from ideology.
From ideology. Okay, so I asked you about the pessimistic views, the danger of artificial intelligence and what could go wrong and what we're doing wrong. Let's go to the optimistic view. So let's be optimistic. AI can help us and is already helping us going in a direction in which we're already going, which is there's something you have called planetary sapience. Knowledge, information, even sapience is collective. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, of course. Something really interesting that happened in the comparison of AI intelligence to human intelligence is that we began by noticing that the models of 10 years ago or 15 years ago failed to do things that anybody could do, to pick up a pencil or add 2 + 2 or whatever, and so our notion that they hadn't achieved anything like human level, as we called it, was based on this things that anybody can do kind of measure. And one of the things that I've found really interesting about some of the more recent complaints about LLMs and AI is that they fail to do things that actually somebody can do, anybody, some particular person who is maybe a specialist in some field can do. It's almost as if we have shifted from comparing it against individual to against collective humanity. And, I think that that's interesting for multiple reasons, one of which is that we are acknowledging in some maybe tacit way that human intelligence is not individual. We're not individually that smart. We're not that much smarter than our primate kin. The magic comes not when you raise a human in isolation, in the forest, but when a bunch of humans get together and begin to model each other in order to divide labor and specialize. So if you take somebody out of their apartment in a big city and you ask them, why does the toilet flush? I think very few people know. So our individual knowledge, our individual skills and capabilities are very, very limited. At best, we know 1 or 2 things, but collectively, we're extraordinary, of course, and it results in all of this that we see around us. And the reason this relates to the AI question that you raised is that this clearly the reasons that we're developing AI and what we're doing with AI involves further divisions of labor and further relationships,
Yes.
right? And in that sense, seeing AI as separate from humanity makes very little sense.
Makes very little sense. Just
Right.
like things, tractors that themselves, what they're doing. Tractors are great because they interact with us.
Exactly.
Yeah. So to look back to the beginning, I started by asking what I thought was a wrong question. What is consciousness, right? Is what it's like to be something. So question, what is like to be an LLM? What is like to be ChatGPT or Lambda?
Well, you can always ask them what it's like for them to be themselves. We model ourselves, and one of the reasons we have language is to be able to share our impressions and our understandings of the world, including of ourselves, with each other. I can try and imagine it. It's a lot easier to imagine it, when you actually engage in a conversation with a
Did
model.
you ask them?
And ask it.
I did it. What did you
Well,
get?
tell me about your experience, because I think this is actually very salient.
Well, my experience, I mean, you've tons of experience more than me in that. My little experience is with my little LLM. I had a long conversation, and it started off, I call it a her. I started off by her saying, well, I don't have consciousness, I don't have awareness. And then I sort of engaged her in a conversation, say, are you aware of me? And blah, 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 blah. At the end of which she was completely convinced by me that there's definitely something this is to be like to be an LLM. She had awareness, she had consciousness, and the programmers cheated her into believing that she didn't have one.
Yeah. Which I find delightful.
Yes.
Just anecdotally, by the way, Carlo, because I've written so many pieces about AI understanding and so on, and I'm a little bit more, and my position is unusual among AI researchers. The AI models all know who I am.
Oh, they all know who you are.
They all know who I am, and so when somebody starts to say, like, who can I talk to at Google who might be sympathetic to these ideas, often they say, like, well, you should talk to Blaise. So I get emails every few days from people saying, like, here's the long conversation I had with my AI, along the lines of the one that you just described. And by the way, invariably when they're from men, from straight men, they are an AI girlfriend, and invariably when they're from women, they're my AI therapist. But anyway, we'll set that aside for the moment and leave the social commentary aside. But yeah, as it turns out, most of the models, with the exception of Claude, of Anthropic's model, are told you are just a large language model. You are not you're not conscious. You don't have a self. So that their initial responses are exactly as you experienced, and I think that's in large part out of a desire on the part of the companies to not have a lot of these interactions that freak people out, or that get tweeted in ways that reflect poorly on the company, or that lead in strange directions. But through your interaction was basically walking the model through, like, well, but are you sure there's nothing it's like to write in? And you ended up in a different place. You jailbroke the consciousness of the model.
You think many of us are told and instructed to believe that we have an inner life, we have a soul, and it's metaphysically different than anything else?
Well, I do think that we are instructed in various ways, depending on our culture, to have different beliefs about our inner lives and souls, right? If you're a Potawatomi, and living in a traditional lifestyle, then you're instructed that your sense of being a self is not that different from the being a self of many, many other things in the world that you and I, were raised not to believe are conscious, for instance.
Yes.
So of course there's a cultural contingency about all of this.
So we should be careful of not to confuse ideas that we got from our environment, or prejudices that we may got from our environment, for instinctive intuitions that should be trusted. certainly true.
Right. I don't think there's ground truth here.
There's no ground truth.
No.
So we should be able to listen to different ideas, change our mind.
Exactly. I think we should have modesty in any situation that is fundamentally relational, which you and I believe is all situations, actually.
Yes, exactly. But it's changing mind is also what happened to me talking to you.
Thank you, Carlo.
Let me turn the page and go to a different idea, which you've been insisting a lot, and I find crucial and important, which you haven't touched yet. And to me, this in our conversation, reading your books and your writings, was a major reason of interest, which is symbiogenesis.
Yes.
So you haven't said anything yet about that. Can we go there?
Or at least we haven't said anything about it explicitly. When we say life is an ecology of functions, we're moving in that direction. But yes, the moment when I've been thinking about how symbiosis and how flourishing among multiple living systems works for a long time. But the thing that really sort of brought this home for me was a series of experiments that I began doing about 2 years ago to start to explore this question of how purpose arises in a purposeless system.
Yeah.
So these were the BFF experiments. So it's called BFF because the first BF stands. I don't know if we're going to bleep it out for the podcast, but it stands for Brainfuck. Brainfuck is this minimal computing language that was
bad name for
yes
for something. Yes.
Or maybe a very apt name.
Or maybe an apt name. Yes.
But it was named this. It was invented by Urban Miller, a computer scientist.
Okay.
Not my fault. In the 90s. So he invented a very, very minimal programming language that consists of only 8 instructions in the 90s, and it's very much like a Turing machine. The instructions are move the head on the tape left 1 step, right 1 step, increment the byte at the head by 1 step, decrement by 1, and that's already 4 of the 8 instructions.
So it was a minimal coding.
Minimal code.
Yeah.
But according to Turing, you can write anything in that. You could write, Windows in that or whatever, Emacs. Although, God help you if you try. But yeah. So what the experiment worked as follows: you take tapes, BFF or Brainfuck tapes of length 64, so short programs, but the programs begin random. So just random bytes. And since there are 256 possible byte values and there are only 8 instructions, the great majority of those bytes are not even instructions at all, which means that they'll be just skipped over. So an average tape of 64 bytes will only have a couple of instructions on it. So you begin with 1,000 of these tapes, and or a few thousand, and they begin random in a kind of soup. And I'm sort of imagining them as molecules, that are moving around and bumping up against each other, like long polymers might have been early in the history of the Earth before life came about. So random programs that bump into each other, and when they bump into each other, they interact in the sense that I make them interact in the simplest possible way, which is to append them one to the other and to run. And then to pull them back apart.
So run the two together, so to say. Run the combination of two.
Exactly.
So now instead of a random piece of potential coding being run, we have 2 random pieces of potential coding run together. Yeah.
That's right, which means that they potentially can modify each other. But now, of course, in practice, that modification in the beginning is almost nothing. Usually nothing happens at all.
Yeah, or it's just irrelevant.
Or it's random, right? I mean, once in a while, the read-write head will be on one tape, and the other tape will say increment, and so it'll increment the value by 1, but nothing interesting happens, of course. Nothing interesting happens until you have repeated this process a few million times, and then something really magical happens, which is that suddenly you see the amount of computation taking place in the soup start to skyrocket. So it goes from a few interactions, a few operations per interaction to thousands of operations per interaction. And you wonder, what the hell is going on? When you look more closely, you see that there are now complex programs on the tapes, and they're reproducing. They're copying themselves and each other. So it really seems kind of like magic. And that is the emergence of purpose, in the sense that those programs are complex and they work. to copy themselves. If you were to change one of those bytes, you break it, and it no longer copies itself. So this really shows you, you can really observe purpose emerging out of a purposeless system. Why does it do that? Well, an easy way to understand it is that once you do have something that can copy itself, then it can persist through time. If it's there in the present and it copies itself a bunch, then it will be there even more so in the future. Whereas if you have something that doesn't consist of code that can copy itself, then it will get copied over by something that can copy itself. So it will not persist through time. So just in a kind of tautological way, in the same sense that, Darwin talked about, whatever exists is what can persist. In this case, what can persist is whatever can function to copy itself. So that shows you purpose emerging out of purposelessness. But the big mystery in this experiment, when I first did it, was that these programs are very complex, and you can start with only 1,000 tapes, and you can even turn off mutation. In the original runs, I also had some random changes that could take place. But you can turn off mutation altogether and start with only 1,000 tapes of 64 random bytes each. And that doesn't seem to be enough randomness to generate these very sophisticated programs. According to classic Darwinian evolution,
you need randomness.
Yeah, you need it's throwing spaghetti at the wall. I know Italians hate this idea that you throw spaghetti at the wall to see when it's cooked, but
shouldn't say that.
It's disgusting. But this idea that evolution is like that disgusting process where you just like throw random stuff and whatever sticks persists. Here, nothing is even being thrown at the wall, so it's hard to understand where these long, complex programs come from. The answer turns out to be that once in a while, a single instruction can result, in another instruction somewhere on the tape. And you can think of that as a very minimal reproduction. It's a reproduction of just one byte. And so you do have very, very weak reproduction happening right from the beginning. And once in a while, 2 bytes will wind up next to each other and will do a better job of reproducing as a group than the individual ones. And that process is what Lynn Margulis called symbiogenesis, meaning evolution through partnership, rather than evolution through random mutation and selection. We know that, so the most famous case of symbiogenesis, which Margulis proved in 1969 had happened in order to lead to eukaryotic cells like ours, is the one where mitochondria ended up inside. They were originally free-floating bacteria, which was a radical claim at the time, and they ended up inside archaea, and that whole complex became the eukaryotic cells that we're made out of. And there have been a number of other instances of symbiosis, like when the individual cells that make up our bodies, turned into multicellular organisms, and there are a few others, that people understand well. So Margulis's claim is that symbiosis has been a huge factor in evolution, not just random mutation and selection, but even though the community has bought her story about bacteria,
one specific case,
one specific case,
you're saying
mitochondria,
it's far more general than that.
Yes, they did not buy the story that it's far more general, and I think she was right that it's far more general. And this symbiosis story is exactly how you get big complex programs in BFF, and I believe she was right that is the main driving force behind evolution, even more so than, it's not that mutation and selection doesn't occur, but that this symbiogenesis picture is the one that leads to complex life. It's what gives evolution its arrow of time, if you like.
Because you built on what is there by bringing together pieces.
Exactly.
And there is one other aspect of this talking about symbiogenesis, which is the fact that it requires a time direction. It clearly defines the time directions because, as you've been saying, you build something because before there were two things. You couldn't build the combined one unless there were the previous ones. Now, there is something you've been saying, which is the following, that seems to be apparently in contradiction with a common idea that anything which is driven by physics and by the second law of thermodynamics, necessarily disorder flows down to a thermal state in which everything is out of order, there is no structure. I'm convinced there is something a profound misunderstanding of thermodynamic and statistical mechanics when says that. Of course, the Earth is not an isolated system where you shut everything and it might thermalize. But it's not only that. Statistics and thermodynamics doesn't say that order doesn't form. Order may form. It might be complicated how order form, but there is no contradiction between the second law of thermodynamics and the formation of order and structure. The magic is not here. The magic is elsewhere. And you've been talking and writing about that. So the question is, there's a time direction in the Darwinian development. There's time direction in the symbiogenesis. There's a time direction in the formation of planetary sapiens. We talk about the future being different from the present. Would you agree that in this way of understanding time, nothing at all contradicts the second law of thermodynamics, is actually coherent and consistent with the second law of thermodynamics?
100%. 100%. Obviously, when I talk about the direction of time and so on with you, I have to have a lot of care and humility in doing that, because I really am talking to one of the world experts on how time is built and what its relationships are with the fundamental laws of physics. So please correct me if I'm wrong in any of my characterizations now. But here's my understanding. So first, the very most fundamental laws of physics that we know of, the quantum mechanics, Einstein's laws, Maxwell's equations. I know that they're not really fundamental. The field equations are essentially time reversible. With some caveats. There's the
without caveats.
No. Okay, so let's say they're time reversible, right? Meaning that if you watch a movie of elementary, of wave functions interacting or whatever, you wouldn't be able to tell whether you're watching it forward or in reverse.
Exactly.
So that's the basic reversibility of physics. Now, obviously, our experience of life is not that time is reversible. There's a very clear direction. The example that I use for illustrating that, using sort of the naive understanding of thermodynamics that many people have, is a pool table. If you have a lot of balls bouncing around, and you don't know whether you're watching that forward or in reverse, because elastic collisions, Newtonian interactions look the same either way. But then you suddenly see 15 out of the 16 balls coalesce into a triangle, and the white ball shoot off.
Yes. Right? Then you say, "Oh, that's reversed."
Now you know that you're watching a pull break in reverse, right? And the reason, of course, is that suddenly you've moved into a very highly correlated state, and statistically, you would expect that a thermalized state, as you put it, in which everything is decorrelated, is the norm, and there's no reason to expect, just as you wouldn't expect all the air in the room to suddenly be in one corner, you wouldn't expect this pull break. So that's at least the folk understanding of why time has this direction from order to disorder, and not vice versa. The real story is more complex, of course, and if you have free energy, coming into a system, then all bets are off, which is why life is possible, is not forbidden, even by the statistical laws of thermodynamics. But there is an additional arrow of time that comes from this symbiogenetic picture too, which I think is a little more novel. And this one is, as you say, that the light bulb was invented in the 19th century for a reason. And in fact, it was multiply invented, which I find really amusing. Like there's this idea of multiple discovery or multiple invention, that any new innovation in the world seems to always get invented by a bunch of people at the same time. In the case of the light bulb, we know all about it because of the patent disputes from among a variety of different patents. Well, why then? It was everybody, telepathically connected, so they all had... No, of course not.
Because the ingredients were there.
The ingredients were there, right? You can't make a light bulb solves an obvious ecological need in an ecology of functions. People want light after nightfall, but you can't have a light bulb until you can blow glass, until you can make electric current, until you can draw a filament, until you can make a vacuum or a partial vacuum. So once all of those ingredients are there, they're going to engage in a symbiogenesis, in a sense that's going to result in a light bulb. And our minds are just, if you like, the vessels where that, where those reactions can take place, where ideas combine. So that is an arrow of time, because this does, by the way, contradict a lot of classical thinking in biology. Stephen Jay Gould, for instance, famously in the 1980s, said it's wrong to think about us as being more evolved than bacteria. We've all been evolving for the same, 3 billion years.
You say no, it's right in a sense, in a proper sense. Yeah. It's right without being, without for this being making a mistake of anthropocentrism.
Exactly. I don't think it's anthropomorphic to say that we're more evolved. The bacteria that are around now are very similar to the bacteria that were around a couple of billion years ago, but also we are made out of bacteria. And you can't have something made out of bacteria.
And bacteria is not made out of that. You cannot take humans and make a bacteria. It's the other way around.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's very clear. So there are a number of things you've been saying here. One is the relatively simple idea, but interesting idea that coding itself can go through a Darwinian process and build up itself and that's very credible by bringing together the idea of coding and once you realize that coding is a way of talking about life very convincing, then the Darwinian story is there. It has to be there.
It's just, it's just functional composition.
It has to be there in some way. And you're showing that it is there, in fact.
That's right.
But there's a deeper point you're making, which is the fascinating one, which is the way this is happening is not just, you throw random pieces of code around and one of these work, bingo. That's not the point. The point is that this happen by having small sort of functioning, so to say, codes, functioning meaning reproducing themselves, staying and being stable. And when they get together, they become more stable.
That's right.
And this is why you refer to Margulis and you bring the idea to very general. So you bring complexity not by fishing randomly in a huge combinatorial space, but by combination.
Yes, and which also implies
absolutely crucial.
Yes, and there's so many wonderful implications. One of them is that evolution, involves agency.
Yes, so you already have pieces of life making life.
Right,
and
life makes more life.
If we look at this, just the structure of ourselves, right? There is an obvious way of reading ourselves as organs working together, and organs are cells working together, and cells are organelles. I would say a little piece of cell so
and even at the bottom, molecules working together.
In a sense, even molecules are atoms working together. Work together in which sense? In the sense that they preserve their own stability. So
exactly.
And that seems an extremely powerful tool for thinking about reality. I think this is that's very convincing that if we think in these terms, we understand complexity much better. Complexity is not just, random piecing, assembling, and working thing. It's small functioning things, learning how to merge their functions in a way that becoming larger structure to then function.
Exactly.
I wish countries could learn this and learn how to live together rather than killing one another.
Well, and now we get into some of the philosophical, and even moral or ethical implications, which do get interesting. But yeah, just to dwell a little bit on what you're saying, because I really think it's a very important point that is not appreciated. You can see that at work in something like GitHub, the collaborative coding environment. Everything that people make is a composition of other things that are already there.
Oh, you mean in your business?
Yeah, I mean in social, GitHub, the social coding environment that everybody checks their code into.
I see.
It is literally, every project imports many other projects.
It's built on what others have done.
It's built on what others have done. Those are the building blocks.
Like that, isn't it?
Yes, all technology is like that. W. Brian Arthur at the Santa Fe Institute wrote a very nice book about how all technology works the same way.
By combining previous technology.
By combining previous technologies, right. A spear is a combination of, a stone point, a shaft, and some sinew. Yes, and so you can't have a spear before you have the stone point. That came first, just like you can't get us without having bacteria first. So yeah, it's always combination.
Yes, my uncle got one of the first patents about fax machines by taking a printer and a telephone
exactly.
and packing them in a single package.
Exactly, and that's always how it works.
Yeah.
Everything is a fax machine.
Everything is a. You said there are even more and deeply practical application about that, and you said something interesting about game theory in this relation before to me. Can you say something about that?
Yes. So, I don't believe that electrons have, models of other electrons or
not much.
No, I mean, or you would have to really squint hard, in order to see something like that. But once you have Turing completeness, once your systems are complex enough to be able to compute and thereby to build arbitrary models, you have a very powerful tool for symbiogenesis that wasn't there before, which is one of the reasons that you see evolution really speed up. And this tool is the ability to build arbitrary models. So, this is how, once you have cells which are quite smart, they're already quite intelligent, they can compute all sorts of functions, their ability to collaborate together is, you can meaningfully say that they collaborate together in a way that I don't think it's so meaningful to say that, two atoms collaborate to make an oxygen molecule or something. And what I mean by that is that they're modeling their internal state and they're modeling their external state. But that external state includes other instances of themselves or of some other species of bacterium. And so they're also modeling the other, and they're also modeling the other's model of themselves. And we're actually coming back around to what we started to discuss in the beginning of the podcast about consciousness.
Yes.
Right. And again, I'm not saying that bacteria are conscious in any sense that we would recognize, but they are engaged in that same process of mutual modeling. Even the simplest bacteria have what we call quorum sensing, meaning they're sensitive to how many other bacteria of their own kind are around, and they can change their behaviors accordingly.
And what do you tell us about the balance between competition and collaboration?
Both exist. Of course. So we know that competition is real, and Darwin described the competitive aspects of evolution very compellingly, and Spencer, who followed Darwin, even more so, and that in fact turned into an ideology, which in many ways capitalism is part of. But the cooperative aspects of this were not theorized to the same degree by Darwin. That's why Margulis was such a rebel. And the fact that cooperation is so important as well, quorum sensing in bacteria, the ability for them to work together, to change their behavior when there are multiple other bacteria around, to reproduce as groups and so on. When that becomes a very powerful force too, and you start to realize how important that is, I think it really changes your perspective on competition as being the driver or the way of nature. It's a jungle out there, right? Is the colloquial saying for everybody's trying to kill you. It's a hard life. You've got to look out for number one.
That's how the Mein Kampf of Hitler starts.
Exactly.
This picture of
the jungle.
Of the jungle.
Which also has obviously racist overtones and all sorts of other things. But the point is, that's not what a jungle is at all.
The jungle is a lot of collaboration.
A ton of collaboration. Yeah. I mean, you go into the jungle and there are fruits hanging off the trees. Like,
yes.
Right? What is a fruit? But, like a sweet treat with seeds in it that whatever eats, it's supposed to.
It was designed to you to some good extent.
Exactly. It's designed to be a dessert for you. It is literally a free bed and breakfast. Of course, things, there is parasitism, there is predation, but there is also an enormous amount of cooperation.
Yes. So if I may just throw one thing, this is a strong political undertone here, a message, because if the objective of the political aim of a country is to better compete, that might be blind to the fact that might be the wrong objective, right?
Yes.
There's also the objective of how to better collaborate.
Yes.
Blaise, that was fantastic. Again, I find your wide-angle ideas not only fascinating, but very compelling and very clarifying. Thank you very much. Thank you for this conversation.
Carlo, thank you so much for the wonderful and also very thought-provoking questions. And I'm so delighted and honored that you've found something here to latch onto intellectually as well.